do we know that, especially in specific regions, the objective of making globalization greener and fair has become a reality?
Asia has had to rethink itself and to reinvest in itself. And it had to do this in a very, very dramatic way, precisely because it was in fact cheaper to trade with Europe than to trade with itself. And at that time, it did not have the right mechanisms to trade with itself, or even the coordination in terms of financial transfers and financial and exchange rate coordination. So it had to rethink itself. So what did it do? It basically felt that besides looking at the global markets, it had to build a more unified regional market. And it had to create decent jobs through an agenda of regional connectivity, which meant that it had to rethink on how did it use its reserves, or how did it use its wealth and its growth and the stimulus packages, because it had to finance itself out of the financial crisis. How did it use its financial stimulus packages to invest in infrastructure gaps? How do you look at the Trans-Asian railways? How do you make the railway connections? How did you make the Asian highway connections? How do you actually deal more with the trade facilitation across borders? How did you deal with not just the hardware of connectivity in terms of the roads, but the software of connectivity in terms of all the visa problems, the problems across borders, before border, developing a single window on trade. How do you develop not country by country, but actually develop in terms of regional strengths?
Because they felt that growth was not sufficient, and that growth was not trickling down, and that it was not creating jobs. And therefore, job-centered growth in the context of Africa was where the priority was. And we kept emphasizing job-centered growth. And why? Because in the context of Africa also, we found out that there was a rising youth population, which was a time bomb. And therefore, we need to begin to quickly look at how do you generate jobs for a population of where you have over 40%, 50% of your population are youth. And they are coming out from universities without jobs. And therefore, a youth-centered, a job-centered growth has to embrace a number of dimensions. And one dimension of a job-centered growth, that as we saw it, was how do you manage productive assets? The issue of productive assets came very, very, very much to the forefront. And productive assets in the context of Africa was land. How do we use our land, especially in an agrarian economy, especially an economy where agriculture is the backbone of that economy? So the land policy issues has been addressed. And I know within ECA and AU, we have a continental land policy that we are pushing that is encouraging our governments to look at land as a productive asset. And how do you manage these productive assets so that there is an equitable use of our productive assets? The second area of job-centered growth that we thought we need to pay emphasis on is the area of wealth creation. Wealth creation in terms of our private sector, because we still believe that our private sector is weak, and therefore we need to look at policies that will allow a robust, private sector with the competitiveness that is required for Africa to move away from a commodity export-based growth to a growth that has value addition, especially looking at our agriculture. And here is where we're looking at our agricultural value chain, the issue of value chain and how those value chains can create jobs, because we know that a social welfare program, we do not have the resources to support a social welfare program, and therefore the emphasis is on productivity, is on competitiveness, and making sure that the majority of our people have access to the productive resources and assets that are required.
all that was built on several basic pillars. First, a high level of fiscal redistribution. This is a uniform feature that is very much present also now, that is being discussed and that is being attacked, both as far as policy approach is concerned, but also because of some external factors, notably the crisis that is there, and of course the issue of fiscal austerity. But nevertheless, there is still a high level of fiscal redistribution. Another major pillar, major factor of this rather inclusive social development that is one of the characteristics of the region is the fact of very strong workers' rights that are existing notably in Europe, but not only in Europe, because I speak about my region. It means also United States, Canada, and the post-Soviet, if I may say so, countries, including Central Asian states. And the third factor that is very strong here is rather equitable market-based income. I'm not saying and speaking about excesses, and notably in the countries of transition, there were many excesses because of privatization that created a lot of problems and growth that you cannot call equitable. But nevertheless, in principle, this characteristics is and has been very strong. Nevertheless, the trend of the past 20 years is showing that all the three pillars are being eroded, be it by external factors, but also by different internal factors, political decisions, including a certain movement away from the traditional European social model that was here and that was prevailing for many decades to a more US liberal, neoliberal model.
Our region can tell you exactly how. I would assume that the 5 pillars of any new growth model that we need to look at should include, number 1, the political dimension. You cannot talk about growth without talking about political governance, without talking about democracy, without talking about popular participation, the ability of the people to participate in decisions that affect their lives. Second, you have to talk about social justice. You need to talk about the distribution of income. It's not enough to grow. You need to know how the fruits of growth are distributed. Thirdly, I think social inclusion has to be an integral part of any growth model, and by social inclusion, I mean the inclusion of marginalized people, minorities, whether they are ethnic minorities or religious minorities. There should be no discrimination against sex. We should guard against the dictatorship of the majority. Citizenship should be the basis for rights. Fourthly, and probably this applies to our region more than others, we have to talk about affirmative action or empowering those who have been marginalized in the past. This includes women, and this includes the youth, and of course environmental sustainability. So in brief, I would say that it is now time to combat poverty of opportunity, not just income poverty. It's time to start looking at deficits beyond deficits in the budget and in the current account. We have to look at deficits in empowerment and deficits in freedoms. And finally, I think, or at least from our point of view, from our region, we need to free people not just from poverty, we need to free them also from fear. I'll stop it.
La combinación de crecimiento con distribución de ingresos es una novedad histórica en la región. Una otra cosa es que de 2002 hasta 2008 los niveles de pobreza cayeron de 44% a 33%. Por lo tanto, una caída de 11 puntos percentuales. Es un otro dato fundamental. Nuestra gran preocupación fue, claro, con la crisis, porque la crisis ponía en la coyuntura la posibilidad de volver a la región volver a tener una regresión social, porque esa es una característica típica de la región. Durante mucho tiempo, durante las crisis, había una regresión social en los indicadores de pobreza, en los indicadores de distribución de ingresos, en los indicadores de empleo, del nivel de los ingresos y así por delante, de las condiciones generales de vida y así por delante. Entonces teníamos una preocupación de que el enfrentamiento de la crisis podría pasar por recetas que provocarían ese tipo de cosas.
It is an inclusive and sustainable development agenda that balances up the need of the economy where you focus on wealth generation, but to make sure that wealth is shared, so there's shared prosperity. But at the same time, there is no shared prosperity without investment in human capital, and therefore the investment in social capital and in, as part of the economic agenda and more. And then the third one is precisely how do you actually make sure that this is sustainable across generation. But at the same time, Asia is also investing in being more resilient. And the resilience agenda takes into account not just the natural disasters, but also the capacity in the economic and social sector to deal with the shocks, to deal with external shocks and the volatility, including price volatility in terms of food prices, the commodity prices, but equally, I think the struggle at this current moment is one of a democratic struggle. Based on how do you actually develop greater democratic space so that there is greater inclusion, so that the people who have been excluded from the shared wealth, the minorities, some of the women workers in the export processing zone, the rural sector, how do you ensure that they are all integrated and that at the end of the day, their grievances would also be addressed as part of this inclusive and sustainable development agenda?
Our region, just for those of you who cannot link Western Asia with specific countries, it's mainly 14 Arab states. The Arab states that are in Asia plus Egypt and Sudan. I think our region can present the prime example of the failings of the prevailing growth model that has been the norm for the past couple of decades. If you look at how the uprising started in the Arab world, and they started in Tunisia, it was a vote of objection. It was rebelling against indecent work. It was rebelling against marginalization and injustice. And this marginalization and injustice happened when those countries were hailed by the international community as star performers. I mean, so the first failing of the prevalent model was that it focused on numbers and not on quality. It focused on growth and not how the fruits of growth were distributed. In particular, in Tunisia and Egypt, we had high rates of growth. However, only a few, basically the political elite and the business elite who benefited from this growth. The majority of the people were marginalized. And that's why people took to the streets when one street vendor was assaulted and a policewoman tried to take his card from him. And it started a rebellion all over Arab states. I think the second failing of the current growth paradigm relates to focusing on dollars rather than values and rights.
Decent jobs are not addressing the issues of how to increase employment as one of the most important elements in this equation. And of course, it means that more and more we are witnessing here in our region and notably in Europe social and political problems. I will not speak about them, we might come back to them later, but this is the fact of life, and it's just enough to look around and read the newspapers about many countries. What are the impacts, what are the implications of these kind of policies that are being adopted. It is also recognized in this region that green growth and green jobs might be one of the ways out, one of the components of the way out. And it is not recognized only nationally, but if you look at certain policies that are being developed in different sub-regions, and notably, for example, in the European Union, you would see that this is one of the elements that should bring and revitalize the whole region, basing the policy approaches on how to increase competitiveness.
Hablar de prioridade para políticas públicas, seja políticas produtivas, seja políticas redistributivas, seja políticas de ciência e tecnologia, há que se hablar del financiamento. Isso significa ter uma carga tributária, ter uma fiscalidade adequada para financiar isso. Uma outra coisa é o baixo nível de produtividade e das taxas de inversões. Mantener um processo de distribuição de ingressos, para mantenerlo, é necessário ter também um processo sostenido de crescimento da produtividade. E de um crescimento da produtividade que se distribuya para os vários sectores da economia. Nós chamamos esse problema de la concentração da produtividade em determinados setores de heterogeneidade estrutural. Todavia, a heterogeneidade estrutural na América Latina e Caribe é bastante significativa. Então, há que ter políticas industriais de ciência e tecnologia e tratar como oportunidade esse momento em que os preços das commodities estão mais elevados para financiar programas de produção e financiar políticas sociais. Então, essas são dimensões. Há lado que é muito bem, período histórico importante, com dados positivos, pero para sostenerlo adelante vão ser necessárias políticas de reestruturação produtiva. O tema da integração regional também é fundamental. O comércio intrarregional é crescente, com uma contribuição bastante grande para o crescimento do PIB de los países de la región. Entonces, hacer este esfuerzo es fundamental.
One of the region that came together very quickly was the ASEAN region. And immediately the connectivity agenda for ASEAN and ASEAN +3 became extremely strong. But there were many problems with that because there were many differences and gaps, not just in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of governance, in terms of development gaps, in terms of investment in public policies, in terms of social protection systems. So these were basically issues that had to be put on the agenda. But what was interesting was that for the first time, the thinking about what to do with social protection and what to do with providing income security through decent work and more was discussed not in terms of a social development agenda, but as part of the economic recovery agenda.